For 20 years, she carried a secret that would rewrite the laws of her world. A second heartbeat, a second wolf, the spirit of her dead twin, locked inside her since birth. To everyone, she was just Elara, a quiet Omega. But when the Alpha King looked at her, he didn't see one soul, he saw two, and he was the first to realize she was the most powerful being alive. This is the story of Elara, raised as a gentle Omega in a world that values only brutal strength. For 2 decades, her twin's silent power was her deepest secret and her greatest burden. But when the king's gaze sees the truth she's hidden, everything changes. The delicate lie of her life is about to shatter. Her story begins not with power, but with profound loss. Elara and her twin sister, Lyra, were born during a brutal winter storm to a mid-ranked pack. The birth was catastrophic. Lyra was stillborn. But as the pack healer went to comfort the grieving mother, she froze. The tiny living infant Elara was not crying. She was emitting 2 distinct, synchronized heartbeats, a medical impossibility, a spiritual anomaly. The pack alpha was summoned. He took one look at the child, felt the pulse of 2 souls in one tiny body, and made a decree that would define Elara's life. The twin spirit had anchored itself to the living sister. To reveal this would invite fear, dissection, or war from rival packs who would see a dual-spirited wolf as an ultimate weapon or an abomination. Elara would be raised as a simple Omega, the lowest rank, her true nature buried under a mountain of lies. For 20 years, Elara believed the story she was told. She was a sickly child, her weak constitution the reason for her Omega status. Her parents, sworn to secrecy, loved her but watched her with constant, gnawing fear. Her inner world, however, was never lonely. Lyra was there. Not as a voice, but as a presence, a second set of instincts, a surge of foreign emotion during a pack hunt, a reflexive strength that flickered when Elara was threatened. It was a secret conversation between 2 souls sharing a single skin. Elara learned to quiet the second heartbeat, to dampen the twins' wilder impulses. She became a ghost in her own pack, tending to gardens and caring for pups, her gaze perpetually downcast. To be noticed was to be in danger. The pack that hid her, the Ashwood pack, was not cruel, but it was rigid. Their alpha, Borin, was a traditionalist who saw the world in strict hierarchies. Alphas led, betas enforced, omegas served. He upheld the lie not out of love for Elara, but out of terror for what she represented. A living breach of the natural order. His own power, derived from a single dominant wolf spirit, felt inherently threatened by her hidden duality. He ensured Elara remained isolated, her education limited, her potential never tested. The few times her control slipped, a display of preternatural speed to catch a falling child, an empathic sense that located a lost hunter in a blizzard, were explained away as flukes. The pack, sensing their alpha's unease, followed his lead. Elara grew up surrounded by wolves, yet utterly alone. But a secret of this magnitude creates its own pressure. The supernatural energy of 2 wolf spirits in one body cannot be perfectly contained. It leaked out in subtle ways. Animals were strangely calm around her. Flowers bloomed out of season near her window. And on the night of the full moon, when every wolf spirit was closest to the surface, Elara didn't just feel her own wolf. She felt Lyra's too, pacing, restless, and infinitely more powerful. It was on one such night, when she was 16, that she accidentally tapped into that reservoir. A rogue wolf, maddened by silver poisoning, attacked the pack's perimeter. In the chaos, it cornered a beta. Without thinking, Elara stepped between them. Fear for the beta triggered something deep within. Lyra's spirit surged forward. Elara's eyes flashed not with one color, but 2, her own silver, overlaid with Lyra's spectral blue. The rogue wolf didn't just back down. It whined, dropped to its belly, and showed its throat in absolute submission to the dual power it couldn't comprehend. Alpha Borin witnessed it. His solution was not gratitude, but stricter confinement. The walls of her gilded cage tightened. The stability of this decades-long deception was about to be shattered by an outside force. Kale, the Alpha King, was not a man who ruled just one pack. He commanded the allegiance of dozens, his authority carved from ancient lineage and victories in wars most packs only whispered about. He was a force of nature, and he was coming to the Ashwood territory for a routine territorial audit. For Alpha Borin, this was a political nightmare. The king was famously, terrifyingly perceptive. His own power was so vast. Legend said he could hear the heartbeat of a mouse from a mile away and sense the truth in a wolf's soul by scent alone. Borin's orders to Elara were simple and desperate. Stay in the Omega quarters. Do not attend the welcoming feast. Do not let the king catch your scent. The night of the king's arrival, the Ashwood Great Hall was filled with tension and false cheer. Elara obeyed. She hid in the back kitchens, scrubbing pots, her twin spirit curled tight and silent within her, a practiced act of compression. But fate, or perhaps the pull of two destined souls, intervened. A carrying tray overloaded with ceremonial goblets slipped from a nervous Beta's hands, crashing directly outside the kitchen door. The sound was explosive. The sudden spike of alarm from the hall was a wave that crashed over Elara's carefully built walls. For a single catastrophic second, her control shattered. Lyra's spirit, startled by the collective fear, flared outward. It was just a pulse. A ripple in the unseen energy that all werewolves emanate. In the grand hall, 50 feet away, King Chaol was in mid-sentence, discussing timber rights. He stopped. His head turned, not toward the noise, but toward the kitchen corridor. His legendary gold eyes narrowed. He had just felt something impossible. Not one powerful spirit momentarily revealed. Two. Perfectly intertwined. His gaze locked onto the kitchen door as a stunned silence fell over the room. He took a single deliberate step toward it. Every eye in the Ashwood Great Hall followed the king's gaze. The air grew thick, charged with a dominance so potent it made the candles gutter. Alpha Borin stepped forward, a forced smile cracking his face. "My king, a minor accident in the kitchens. Please, let us continue." Chaol ignored him. He took another step, then another, his movement a silent command that parted the crowd. He stopped before the kitchen door. Behind it, Elara was pressed against a stone wall, her heart both of her hearts hammering against her ribs. She could feel him through the wood. His power was an ocean, and she was a sinking stone. The door did not open. It blew inward, splintering off its hinges from a mere flick of the king's wrist. And there she was, an Omega in a simple, flower-dusted dress, frozen in the light of 100 staring nobles. Chaol's golden eyes found hers. He inhaled, slowly. The entire pack held its breath. His expression shifted from curiosity to stunned disbelief, then to something akin to reverence. 2 heartbeats, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. 2 souls. I have heard the legends, but I never believed until this moment. Chaos erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs. Alpha Borin rushed forward. "A trick of the acoustics, my king. The girl is sickly. Her rhythm is irregular. Silence." Chaol did not raise his voice, but the word carried the weight of a mountain. Borin was physically forced back a step, his protest dying in his throat. The king's attention never left Elara. "Look at me, child." Elara forced her chin up, terror icing her veins. "What is your name?" "Elara," she whispered. "Elara," Chaol repeated, as if tasting the truth of it. "Who is the other presence within you?" It was the question she had been forbidden to answer for 20 years. To lie to the Alpha King was impossible. To tell the truth was to break her pack's most sacred law. A tear traced a path through the flower on her cheek. "My twin," she breathed, the confession tearing itself from her. Lyra, the name hung in the air, a ghost-given sound. Chaol closed his eyes for a second, as if listening to a distant song. When he opened them, they blazed with absolute certainty. Not a possession, a partnership, a convergence. He turned to the horrified assembly, his voice now a declaration. "You have been sheltering a living miracle and calling it a weakling. You have forced a sovereign power to kneel." Alpha Borin found his voice again, desperate. "King Chaol, with respect, this is an internal pack matter. A genetic defect we have humanely managed. She is an Omega. She has no control, no rank. She has more power in her smallest finger than you have in your entire being." Chaol interrupted, his tone glacial. "You didn't manage her. You muzzled her. You saw a second sun and tried to pretend it was a candle." He looked back at Elara, his gaze piercing through her fear. "Show them." Elara shook her head, a frantic tiny motion. "I can't." "You can," Chaol said, and it was not an order, but an unlocking. His own power, vast and steady, reached out not to suppress, but to support. It was like a dam offering its strength to a rising river. For the first time in her life, Elara didn't have to compress Lyra's spirit alone. The king's presence held a space for it. The control she had maintained for 2 decades, fueled by fear and isolation, shattered. And Lyra surged. A wave of energy exploded from Elara. It wasn't violent, but profoundly displacing. Every wolf in the vicinity felt their own inner spirit bow in acknowledgement. The physical change in Elara was subtle but undeniable. Her silver eyes now swirled with strands of deep, celestial blue. The air around her shimmered, like heat haze on a summer road. and from her chest, for those with preternatural hearing, came the undeniable synchronized double rhythm, thu-thump, thu-thump. It was the sound of a myth walking. The pack stumbled back as one. Omegas dropped to their knees, not in submission to Kale, but in instinctive reverence to the dual power now radiating from their former servant. Betas looked at their alpha with dawning horror at the lie they had all lived. Kale nodded, as if a great hypothesis had been proven. The twin spirit Omega. The stories say the last one lived 1,000 years ago. She didn't just lead a pack. She united 3 warring continents and brought the long peace. He took a step toward Elara, his dominance receding, leaving only stark intensity. Your birth wasn't a tragedy, it was a return. The implications crashed over the room. Borin's face was ashen. His authority, built on hierarchy and control, was evaporating. He had not protected a secret, he had imprisoned a queen, and he knew what happened to jailers when the prisoner was freed. "She is my pack member," Borin insisted, a last, feeble grasp for control. "Under my protection and my law." Kale finally turned his full attention to the Ashwood Alpha, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "Your protection?" Kale's voice was lethally soft. "You mean the protection that forced her to hide? The protection that made her fear her own breath? You have no law that applies to her. She exists outside of your tiny hierarchy." He made a gesture to his own beta, a mountain of a man named Rai, who had been standing silently by the door. "Prepare for travel. We leave for the Obsidian Citadel within the hour." Elara's mind reeled. The Obsidian Citadel was the seat of the king's power, a fortress spoken of in whispers. To go there was to leave the only world she had ever known, however cruel it had been. I can't," she said again, this time to Kale. "My life is here." "What life?" Kale asked, not unkindly. "The one where you scrub floors and hide your soul. That is not a life. It is a slow death. Your sister did not anchor herself to you so you could waste away in a kitchen." The mention of Lyra, from his lips, struck a chord deep within Elara. For the first time, someone spoke of her twin not as a shameful secret, but as a sacred bond. Lyra's spirit within her seemed to settle, as if hearing a truth it had waited 2 decades to hear. Alpha Borin saw his entire world collapsing. His secret was exposed, his authority mocked, and the king was about to take the source of his shame and fear away, to elevate it. Rage and desperation curdled in his gut. "You cannot just take her. There are protocols, the Pack Council." "The Pack Council answers to me," Kale stated, absolute finality in every syllable. "And they will be informed that the Ashwood Alpha knowingly concealed a twin spirit and misrepresented her rank. Your standing with the Council is now forfeit. Your pack is under audit." It was a death sentence for Borin's rule. The whispers in the room turned from shock to terrified speculation. An audit by the king's officials would rip the pack's finances and secrets wide open. Borin would be deposed, possibly exiled. In his eyes, the cause of his ruin was not his own lies, but the girl trembling by the pantry. His fear twisted into hatred. As Kale turned back to Elara, extending a hand not to command but to invite, Borin moved. It wasn't an attack on the king that was suicide. It was a lunge toward Elara, claws extending, his face a mask of feral spite. If he couldn't have her hidden, no one would have her glorious. He would destroy the miracle and face the consequences. Time seemed to slow. Elara saw the fury in her alpha's eyes, the glint of claws aimed at her heart. But a lifetime of suppressing Lyra had just ended. The king's presence had opened a door, and as Borin leaped, Elara didn't command Lyra's power. She simply let go. A soundless pulse of blue-silver light erupted from her. It didn't strike Borin down. It froze him in midair, suspended, his claws inches from her face. A low, resonant growl filled the room, coming from Elara's throat, but layered with another, deeper voice. It was the sound of 2 wolves, united. Borin hung there, paralyzed not by external force, but by the sheer, overwhelming will of the dual spirits facing him. His own wolf whimpered inside him, completely dominated. Kale watched, his golden eyes alight with fierce approval. He had known she had the power. Now, so did she. Elara, breathing heavily, looked from Borin's trapped, horrified form to the king. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice still her own, but edged with Lyra's ancient strength. Kale smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe face. "Whatever you wish, Elara, he is yours to judge." The entire pack waited. The Omega held the fate of their Alpha in her hands. This was the pivot. The hidden power was not just revealed, it was now undeniably, terrifyingly active. Elara looked at Borin, at the man who had sentenced her to a life of shadows. She felt no vengeance, only a vast, sorrowful strength. She lowered her hand. Borin dropped to the floor in a heap, gasping, his dominance shattered as thoroughly as if she had ripped it out. "I am not your judge," Elara said, her jewel-toned voice echoing softly. "You have judged yourself every day for 20 years. That is punishment enough." She turned her back on him, a gesture far more powerful than any attack. She faced Chaol. "I will go with you." The journey to the Obsidian Citadel was a blur of snow-dusted pines and silent, armored vehicles. Elara sat beside Chaol in the plush interior, her body thrumming with the aftermath of revelation. The bond between them was not a mate bond, it was something older, a recognition between sovereign powers. He explained the legends of the twin spirits, how they were considered arbiters and unifiers, their dual nature allowing them to see all sides of a conflict. "The world has grown fractured since the last one died," Chaol said, watching the mountains rise outside the window. "Pacts war over resources. Old alliances crumble. Many, like Borin, cling to rigid hierarchies because they fear anything they cannot control." He looked at her. "You represent change, and change is always met with fear and with enemies." He warned her of the court at the Citadel, the gathered alphas, betas, and political mates who would scrutinize her, test her, and seek to use her. "Some will see you as a divine return, others will see you as a threat to be eliminated. My protection is absolute, but you must learn to stand on your own. Or rather," he corrected, "stand with your sister." When the Citadel came into view, Elara understood it was not just a fortress. It was a statement carved into the side of a glacial peak. Black stone and gleaming metal, it was both ancient and impossibly modern. As her vehicle crossed the final bridge, she felt a wave of powerful, scanning auras from the guards. They were not just assessing a guest, they were sensing a seismic shift in their world. She was ushered into a grand receiving hall, this one dwarfing Ashwood's. Dozens of the most powerful wolves she had ever sensed stood in clusters, their conversations dying as she entered on Chaol's arm. The stares were a physical pressure. Curiosity, hostility, awe, and naked ambition. Chaol led her to a dais, presenting Elara of the Ashwood line, he announced, his voice filling the vast space. "The twin spirit Omega, recognized and acknowledged under my authority and protection." The silence that followed was profound. Then, an older alpha with a grizzled beard and cold eyes stepped forward. He was Alistair from the powerful Frostfang pack. "With all respect, my king," Alistair said, his tone dripping with faux deference. "This is an extraordinary claim. The legends are just that, legends. Before we reorganize our world around an Omega from a backwater pack, should there not be a verification? A test, perhaps, of this alleged dual nature?" A test. The word hung in the air. It was a direct challenge, veiled in protocol. Chaol's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Elara felt it. A surge not from Lyra, but from the crowd. A focused, vicious spike of metaphysical pressure aimed directly at her, designed to make any Omega collapse. It came from Alistair's direction. He was testing her himself, violently and without consent. The attack was invisible, but to Elara's newly awakened senses, it was a spear of condensed dominance. Instinctively, her own defenses rose. Not a wall, but a mirror. The pressure hit her dual-layered spirit and reflected, not back at Alistair, but dissipated harmlessly into the surrounding space, causing the chandeliers to tinkle softly. Elara didn't flinch. She simply turned her silver and blue eyes on Alistair. "The test," she said, her calm voice carrying, "is already over." A murmur rippled through the court. She had not only withstood a covert assault from a famed alpha, she had neutralized it with effortless, incomprehensible grace. Alistair's face flushed with anger and shock. He had intended to expose a fraud. Instead, he had confirmed a sovereign. Chaol's smile was a blade. "Thank you, Alistair, for the demonstration. The verification is complete." But Elara knew, as she looked out at the sea of calculating faces, that this was only the beginning. Alistair's humiliation would fester. Other traditionalists would see her as an aberration, and somewhere the news was already spreading to packs far and wide. The king had found the twin spirit. To some, she was a savior. To others, she was the ultimate prize, or the ultimate threat that needed to be destroyed before her power could fully awaken. The gilded cage of Ashwood was gone. Now she stood in the center of a much larger, much more dangerous arena. In the silent wake of her first victory, Elara learned that recognition was not the same as acceptance. The Obsidian Court was a web of ancient grudges and ambitions, and she had just landed in the very center of it. Alistair's public humiliation became a rallying cry for the traditionalist faction. They did not attack her directly again. King Chaol's protection was too absolute. Instead, they attacked her legitimacy through tradition itself. They dusted off archaic laws, specifically the rite of twin moons, a ceremony not performed in a millennium. It was a ritual of verification meant for a twin spirit, requiring the candidate to channel both spirits simultaneously under the light of a full moon to commune with the ancestral plane. The traditionalists presented it as a sacred necessity, but Kael's head archivist, a gentle beta named Linnea, uncovered the darker truth. The last Omega who attempted the rite 1,000 years ago didn't just fail. She vanished, her body and spirit disintegrated by the overwhelming influx of ancestral power. The rite wasn't a test. It was a death sentence dressed in scripture. Kael refused. He would not risk Elara. But the political pressure mounted. Alistair and his allies began questioning Kael's own judgment, whispering that he was bewitched by a pretty Omega with a clever trick, that he was jeopardizing the stability of all packs for a fairy tale. The unity of the king's court began to crack. Elara saw the strain on Kael. His authority was being eroded by her mere presence. She couldn't hide, and she couldn't let him fight this battle alone. "I'll do it," she told him in the privacy of his war room. The right. Kael's anger was a tangible heat. "No, it's a trap. They want you to die or fail, proving you a fraud either way. And if I don't," Elara asked, a new steadiness in her voice. "If I succeed, their last argument shatters. They have nothing left." She placed a hand over her heart. "Lyra is not a weakness, Kael. She is my strength. They keep treating us as a problem to be solved. Maybe it's time we showed them what we truly are." Her use of "we" was deliberate. She was not just Elara speaking. The night of the full moon arrived. The ceremony was to be held in the Citadel's ancient open-air amphitheater, carved into the mountain peak. Hundreds of wolves from every allied pack gathered, a sea of expectant, hostile and hopeful faces under the cold white light. Alistair presided, a smug vindication in his eyes. The ritual required Elara to stand in a circle of moon-touched silver, open her spirit completely, and call upon the ancestors for a sign. The risk was catastrophic. Opening her spirit that wide could cause the two souls within her to unravel from each other, destroying her mind. Or the ancestral influx could burn her out. As she stepped into the silver circle, the metal hummed, sensitive to spiritual energy. She felt Lyra's spirit stir, not in fear, but in a fierce, protective readiness. For the first time, Elara didn't just feel her twin's presence, she felt her intent. It wasn't random power. It was a will. A will to be seen. Elara closed her eyes and let the walls fall. She didn't push Lyra forward. She simply stepped aside, making room. A gasp went through the crowd. Physically, Elara's form seemed to blur, as if seen through a heat haze. Her silver-blue aura erupted, but this time, it took shape. Faint, ethereal, but unmistakable, the spectral outline of a second wolf, larger and more ferocious than any in living memory, superimposed over Elara's own form. Two sets of eyes glowed from her face. The ancestral plane wasn't a place she reached for, it reached for her. The air filled with the echoes of ancient howls, the scent of forgotten forests. And then, a vision, shared with every wolf present, the last twin spirit, not as a peaceful ruler, but as a furious warrior, defending a pass against a horde of monstrous, corrupted wolves. The message was not one of gentle unity, but of necessary, devastating war. The vision ended with a single, echoing thought: the corruption slept. It now wakes. The two-in-one is the key. The amphitheater was dead silent, then erupted into panic. The rite of twin moons was meant to verify. It had just prophesied. Elara staggered, the spectral wolf fading. The two souls settling back into their shared body, now thrumming with a terrifying new knowledge. Alistair was pale, his triumph turned to dread. He had wanted to prove her a fraud. Instead, she had proven herself a harbinger of apocalyptic war. Kael was at her side in an instant, holding her upright. "What was that?" he murmured, his own warrior's mind grappling with the vision. "A warning," Elara whispered, her voice raw. "Lyra knows. She has always known. That's why she stayed. It wasn't an accident. She was waiting for this." The fallout was immediate and fractured the world into three camps. The traditionalists, led by Alistair, now declared Elara not a fraud, but a curse, an omen of destruction that had attracted this corruption. They demanded she be sealed away for everyone's safety. A second group, the faithful, saw her as the promised savior from the legends and rallied to her side. The largest group was simply terrified and confused. The king's authority was now challenged not over a protocol, but over existential survival. Then, the first concrete report arrived, from a remote border pack near the frozen northern wastes. Their patrols had encountered creatures matching the description from the shared vision. Wolves, but twisted, with eyes of void and claws that dripped a silver corrupting venom. The corruption wasn't a myth. It was here. The crisis forced a desperate coalition. A war council was convened. Alistair, still seething, was forced to attend. Arguments raged for hours. The faithful wanted Ilara to lead a purification ritual. The traditionalists wanted to burn the infected territories and isolate the north. Ilara listened, feeling Lyra's growing frustration within her. Finally, she stood. The room quieted, not from respect, but from apprehension. "You're all wrong," she said, her dual-toned voice quiet but cutting. "This isn't a spirit to be purified or a fire to be contained. It's a wound, an ancient wound in the world itself, and it's festering. Sending armies or lighting pyres is like putting a bandage on a severed artery." She looked at Cale. The vision showed the last twin spirit fighting it. Not with an army, but at a single point, a source. We need to find that place. This led to the second, more personal revelation. Linnea, the archivist, cross-referencing the vision with decaying scrolls, found a location. The Vale of Echoing Stones, deep in the uncontested wildlands. But the scroll also contained a forgotten lineage. The last twin spirit had a mate, a protector. His bloodline was said to carry a guardian mark that would awaken in the presence of the corruption's return. The scroll named the lineage, Hale. Cale went very still. Hale was his mother's maiden name, a line he thought had died out with her. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a birthmark on his forearm he had always had, interlocking spirals that faintly resembled two wolves chasing each other. It had never meant anything. Now, under the candlelight, the mark began to glow with a soft silver light. The protector bloodline hadn't died out. The king wasn't just Ilara's ally. He was her destined guardian, bound by blood oath 1,000 years old. Their meeting wasn't chance. It was a recursion of history. This changed everything and made things infinitely more dangerous. If their bond was preordained by ancient magic, it made them both targets. The traditionalists saw it as further proof of a dangerous, uncontrollable magic manipulating their leadership. More urgently, if the ancient enemy was waking, it would know to target the twin spirit and her guardian above all others. Their safety was now the single biggest strategic vulnerability for all Pax. Cale's war room transformed into a fortress command center. He and Ilara were never to be in the same place at the same time publicly. Their growing personal connection, a mix of deep respect, shared burden, and the spark of something more, had to be buried under layers of security protocol. The intimacy of their long talks was replaced by tactical briefings. The pressure was suffocating. It was during this lockdown that Ilara discovered the true cost of her power. Using it, truly merging with Lyra's will as she had during the rite, was draining. Not just physically, but spiritually. She had visions of Lyra's memories, not just the joyful twin bond from the womb, but the moment of death, the violent severance, the desperate choice to anchor to her living sister. Channeling that anchor required reliving that trauma. Each time she tapped into their unified power, a small part of her own vitality seemed to thin, as if she was burning the candle of her own life at both ends to fuel Lyra's spirit. She was the battery for a ghost. The glorious two-in-one was, in its raw truth, a slowly dying woman holding a door open against a coming storm. She hid this from Cale. He had enough to bear. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. A scout from the infected northern border arrived, half mad, bearing not just a report, but a physical piece of the corruption, a shard of black ice that pulsed with a malevolent light. The moment it was brought into the Citadel's secure vault, Ilara, 2 levels above, screamed and collapsed. Lyra's spirit within her didn't just react, it recoiled in agonized recognition. The shard wasn't just a weapon. It was a piece of the original wound, and it resonated with the twin spirit anchor like a tuning fork of pure pain. The scout, before he died from his own corrupted wounds, babbled a final message. The corrupted wolves weren't mindless. They were being directed by a central intelligence, a heart of the frost, and it was calling. It was calling for the split soul. For Ilara, the enemy had a name for her. It knew what she was, and it wanted her. Not to kill her. The scout's last words were clear. It wants to wear her, to consume the twin spirit and use its unique, unifying power to spread the corruption not just through territory, but through the very spiritual bonds of all werewolves. This was the it gets worse moment. This wasn't an invasion. It was a parasitic apocalypse, and Ilara was the perfect host. Cale, faced with this, made a command decision. The Citadel was no longer safe. The Vale of Echoing Stones, the source from the vision, was their only hope. They would take a small, elite team and go on the offensive, to find a way to close the wound before the Heart of the Frost found Ilara. They would leave behind the political squabbles, the terrified Pax, and run straight into the darkest part of the legend. The journey to the Vale of Echoing Stones was a descent into a dying world. The further north Kael's small, elite team traveled, the more the landscape itself seemed sickened. Trees were skeletal, their bark sloughing off in black flakes. The streams ran silent, their waters thick and oily. The air carried the constant, bitter tang of the black ice. Ilara felt it like a toothache in her soul. Lyra's spirit within her was a constant, agitated hum, a compass needle pointing toward their doom. The team consisted of Kael, his steadfast Beta Rai, the archivist Linnea, whose knowledge of the old ways was crucial, and two of Kael's most lethal trackers. They moved like ghosts, but the corruption knew they were coming. Shadowy, twisted forms moved at the edges of their vision, but did not attack. They were being herded. The Vale, when they found it, was not a valley but a crater. At its center stood a monolith of the same pulsating black ice, jagged and massive, the heart of the frost. Around it, hundreds of corrupted wolves stood in silent, unmoving vigil. They were not a pack. They were a neural network, all connected to the central intelligence in the ice. As the team watched from a high ridge, the air before them shimmered. A figure coalesced from mist and frost, a beautiful, terrifying woman with hair of icicles and eyes of bottomless black. The intelligence had taken a form to speak. "You brought her," the figure said, its voice the sound of glaciers cracking. "The split soul, the anchor. You have saved me the trouble of digging her out of that stone den." Kael stepped in front of Ilara, his guardian mark glowing fiercely. "You will not touch her." The figure laughed. "I do not need to touch her, little king. She is already half mine." Every time she uses the twin spirit, she weakens the veil between life and death. She is a door, and I have the key. It was then that Ilara understood the final, horrific truth. Lyra's spirit wasn't just an anchor against the corruption. It was the only thing keeping the wound closed. The corruption was an ancient spiritual parasite that fed on singular souls. A twin spirit, two souls perfectly merged, was indigestible to it, a locked door. But by using their power, by straining the anchor, Ilara had been slowly picking the lock. The heart of the frost hadn't been calling her to wear her. It had been calling her to finally, fully open the door so it could consume both souls at once and explode into the world. Their entire journey had been a trap. They hadn't come to fight the source. They had delivered the key to its doorstep. The figure extended a hand. The black ice monolith pulsed, and a wave of numbing, soul-cold energy washed over them. The trackers roared, shifting to fight the physical corrupted wolves that now surged up the ridge. Rai held the line, a berserker fury keeping the tide at bay. Linnea chanted a warding spell, her voice a fragile shield against the psychic assault. Kael fought to reach the ice figure, but his movements were slow, as if pushing through deep water. Ilara stood paralyzed, locked in an internal battle. The heart's call was inside her now, a siren song promising an end to the pain, to the burden, to the constant drain of holding a ghost. It promised to let Lyra rest. To let her rest. She felt her will crumbling. Then, from within, Lyra did not push. She gave, not power, but memory. A flood of sensation, not from the moment of death, but from the moment before. The warmth of the womb. The psychic touch of her sister, a perfect, wordless understanding, the joy of we. It was not a memory of loss, but of pure connection, and with it, a crystal clear thought, the first direct communication in 20 years. "I did not stay because of the wound. I stayed for you." The door swings both ways. The revelation was a lightning strike. Lyra wasn't just a spirit anchored to fight the corruption. She was a spirit who had chosen to stay, to be with her sister. Their bond wasn't the lock on the door, it was the door. And a door could be opened to let something in, or to push something out. The heart of the frost was trying to use their connection as a tunnel. Ilara realized they could use it as a cannon. She stopped fighting the pull. She grabbed Kael's hand, his guardian mark flaring at her touch. "Don't fight it," she yelled over the howling wind. "Help me open it." All the way, Kael, trusting her utterly, nodded. He dropped his mental shields, channeling his immense power not as a barrier, but as a conduit, directly into her. Ilara then did the unthinkable. She opened her spirit to the heart of the frost. She let the parasitic intelligence rush in, a torrent of frozen, consuming hunger eager to devour the twin soul prize. But as the corruption poured into the connection, into the sacred space between her soul and Lyra's, Ilara and Lyra did not try to hold it. They embraced it, and then, with Kael's guardian power as a catalyst, they reversed the flow. The twin spirit bond was not a passive anchor, it was a living circuit. They turned themselves into a spiritual lightning rod. They drew the corruption in, not to consume it, but to ground it. The icy intelligence, so focused on consumption, realized its mistake too late. It wasn't eating them. It was being funneled. Elara, Lyra, and Kale focused every ounce of their combined will on the monolith of black ice, the physical heart. The parasitic energy, now trapped in their circuit, had nowhere to go but back to its source. A scream of shattering ice filled the world. The beautiful frost figure exploded into a million black shards. The monolith flashed with contained, violent light and then imploded, collapsing into a pile of inert grey rock. The connection severed, the corrupted wolves surrounding the veil froze mid-lunge, then collapsed like marionettes with cut strings, the vile light fading from their eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. Elara collapsed. Kale caught her, his own energy spent. She was pale, cold, barely breathing, the anchor still held, but the cost was visible. A single streak of pure white now ran through her hair at the temple, the price of channeling that much death. Lyra's presence was still there, but fainter, as if resting deeply after a long battle. They had not destroyed the corruption. They had severed its head and scattered its consciousness. The wound in the world was still there, but without its intelligence, it was inert. A sleeping sickness. Weeks later, back at the Obsidian Citadel, the world was different. The reports from the north confirmed it. The corruptions had stopped spreading. The remaining taint was fading from the land. Elara's actions in the Vale had been witnessed psychically by every sensitive wolf on the continent. She was no longer an omen or a savior in theory. She was the woman who had stared into the heart of the frost and forced it to blink. The political resistance evaporated. Alistair, humbled and horrified by how close his scheming had come to dooming everyone, publicly swore fealty. The traditionalist faction disbanded. Kale's guardian mark never faded again. It remained a soft, permanent glow on his arm, a testament to the awakened oath. He and Elara no longer hid their bond, which had deepened into an unshakable partnership. At the next full moon gathering, Kale did not present her to the court. He stood beside her as she addressed it. Elara, her hair with its white streak, spoke with a quiet authority that needed no dominance to enforce it. She outlined a new council, not based solely on pack rank, but on purpose, healers, trackers, historians, and warriors all having a voice. The first true reform in 1,000 years. The twin spirit would not rule. She would mediate. She would be the balance. The final surprise came months later, during a quiet moment. Elara was in the archives with Linnea, studying the oldest legends. They found a faded illustration of the first twin spirit. She was depicted with a streak of white in her hair. The caption read, "The mark of the covenant, the sign that the living sister has shouldered the eternal vigil, and the departed sister has chosen the endless watch." Lyra had not just saved her. She had bonded to her for all their days, in this life and beyond. The anchor was eternal. Elara would always be two souls in one body. But now she understood it wasn't a burden or a power to be used. It was a promise to stand on the threshold, holding the line between her world and the darkness, with her sister holding her hand from the other side. The story of the Omega with two heartbeats was over. The story of the Guardian and the Threshold Walker had just begun. They had faced the ancient enemy and defined a new future, not by destroying the old ways, but by reminding everyone of the most powerful force of all, a connection so strong, not even death could break it. Elara's story is a reminder that the most profound truths are often hidden in plain sight, mistaken for weakness. For 20 years, a kingdom saw a broken Omega where a legend was sleeping. It took the perception of a king to see the twin heartbeats and the courage of the woman who bore them to finally let them beat in unison. But this isn't just a tale of supernatural power. It's about the bonds that define us, the secrets we carry to protect those we love, and the moment we must stop hiding and become what we were always meant to be. The twin spirit myth asks a compelling question. What if your greatest perceived flaw was actually the source of your unimaginable strength? What if the part of you that feels like a burden is, in fact, your anchor and your compass? Elara and Lyra teach us that true power isn't about dominance over others, but about the harmony we forge within ourselves and with those destined to stand with us. They didn't conquer the darkness with force, but with a connection so sacred it could redirect the very nature of evil. So the next time you feel out of place, or like you don't fit the mold the world has made for you, remember the girl with two wolves. Your unique rhythm might just be waiting for the right moment and the right person to be heard. If you were captivated by this journey of hidden power, destined bonds and epic mythical stakes, do us a huge favor. Smash that like button, it truly helps us bring you more deep dive stories like this. Share this with a friend who loves a twist of fantasy and fate. And of course, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next exploration into the legends that live just beneath the surface of our world. Let us know in the comments, what did you think was the most powerful moment in Alara's transformation? We'll see you in the next story.